Welcome to The Landscape, your podcast about America's parks and public lands. I'm Kate Groetzinger with the Center for Western Priorities in Salt Lake City.
And I'm Aaron Weiss in Denver. On the podcast today, we are talking to super lawyer Steve Bloch from the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance about the Congressional Review Act. What is it? Why is Congress suddenly abusing it? And what does all of this mean for Grand Staircase, the Boundary Waters, and beyond? But first, let's do a little news.
The Bureau of Land Management approved construction of the Northern Corridor Highway, a 4-lane highway that will cut across the Red Cliffs National Conservation Area near St. George, Utah. This conservation area is critical habitat for the Mojave Desert tortoise and other endangered species, and the approval of this highway is a really bad thing. The approval overturns a previously endorsed alternative to upgrade a road along the southern border of the conservation area in a way that would pose less environmental risk to those species and promote better traffic flows in southwest Utah. It also sets a very dangerous precedent for national conservation areas across the country, which of course shouldn't be subject to having roads built through them.
Why would we build a new road when there's a perfectly good one that you can use right now? Is what that one comes down to. Also, the Trump administration's attack on history and science is accelerating. We've seen signs about the horrors of slavery removed from the president's house site in Philadelphia, signs about indigenous Americans removed or censored at Grand Teton and Death Valley, signs about climate change removed from numerous other parks. Now, you can expect all of this to come up on Tuesday when a House Natural Resources Subcommittee meets to talk about the America 250, or now Freedom 250 celebrations. It looks like the Trump administration has fully hijacked what was supposed to be a bipartisan birthday party, and now instead, the National Park Service is being forced to censor American history as part of this rewriting in the semi-quincentennial celebration. I'm going to keep saying semi-quincentennial.
Why not? If you can say it, say it. I can't say it. I'll leave that up to you.
Our guest today is Steve Bloch. He is the legal director at the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, or SUWA. Steve is certainly an invaluable resource when it comes to public land law. We are excited to have him back today to talk about what is going on with the Congressional Review Act and public lands. Steve, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Kate. I appreciate your having me on.
So, start at the beginning. What is the Congressional Review Act, and how does it work just from a nuts and bolts perspective?
So the Congressional Review Act is a 1996 era law passed when Newt Gingrich was running the House of Representatives. The real intent of that law was to allow Congress an opportunity to look back very briefly at rules passed by the prior administration. So, and when I say rules, it's important to know that the real focus was notice and comment rulemaking. So think of Food and Drug Administration, think of Environmental Protection Agency, who would go through a process of drafting rules, submitting them for public comment, and then publishing them in the Federal Register. And Congress wanted the chance to look back at those rules. And if they deemed it fit and if the circumstances were met that we'll talk about, they could undo them.
We're banning this food dye, we're allowing this pesticide, those sorts of decisions that happen at the administrative level. Yeah.
Right. And what we've seen since then over the past 30 years is a real change in how Congress has approached the Congressional Review Act, and in particular for the purposes today, how Congress is now working to apply this look back provision to tackle land management plans that federal agencies like Bureau of Land Management have come up with. The real insidious nature of this Congressional Review Act, or CRA as we'll call it, is that if certain procedures are met, Congress can undo a rule very quickly and with only simple majority votes in both the House and the Senate. So the House, as we all know, operates under majority system all the time in terms of if you have the votes, you can pass your legislation. The Senate side, there's the filibuster, which would stop some things from moving forward. The CRA is exempt from the filibuster, and that's what makes it especially insidious.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So going back to sort of the reason for this law in the first place, I want to even just like lay out the what's going on here even more clearly, make sure I understand it. So Congress passes laws and then agencies implement them via rules, kind of, and other decisions. And the CRA was sort of a way for Congress to have a bit of a check on the agencies if they didn't quite like the way they were applying the law. Is that correct?
I think that's a pretty good summary, Kate. If the stars aligned, and the stars aligning meaning you would have single party control, really, House, Senate, and White House. So following an election, Congress could look back for a brief window of time and look back at a rule that a federal agency had released and finalized and possibly undo that rule.
Effectively, that means it really only came into play when you had an immediate transition of power where one party took both houses of Congress and the White House. That more or less it in terms of applicability.
That's exactly right, Aaron.
Okay. So, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, I was going to say, and then the other thing that we should be talking about that maybe you're going to tee up is once a rule is CRA'd, it's a verb, that the other sort of insidious aspect of the Congressional Review Act is that rules that are CRA'd cannot be replaced in substantially the same form unless Congress votes and allows that. So it is a real salting the earth sort of approach where if Congress uses this fairly extraordinary law to undo an executive branch agency's rule, Congress can prohibit that executive agency from issuing a similar rule forever into the future.
And we will come back to that, which does pose a huge issue with the future of public land management with the way they're using the CRA. So let's get into that. The reason we're here is because Congress is using the Congressional Review Act to repeal resource management plans. Congress has repealed 5 Biden-era RMPs, or resource management plans, for public lands in Alaska, North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. This happened after the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, found that one specific RMP qualified as a rule for the purposes of the CRA. What was the GAO's reasoning in that report saying that an RMP is a rule? And why does that allow Congress to sort of apply it to other RMPs?
So we're talking about land management plans. And I think people are generally familiar with the Bureau of Land Management. How it manages our federal lands under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act is it produces resource management plans, and it goes through a public process for doing that. It takes years usually, and then it finalizes those plans. Notice that I'm saying the word plan and not rule. And so the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, the Park Service, who all go through these outward-facing processes to come up with plans for how to manage the public lands, none of those federal agencies have ever considered those plans to be rules and subject to the Congressional Review Act. And what that means is they've never submitted their plans to the General Accountability Office, the GAO. Now we have to go back for a moment to the Congressional Review Act. Once a federal agency finalizes a rule, it is to submit that rule to Congress and to the General Accountability Office for them to have a brief window to review and decide if they want to try to CRA it, to undo it. No federal agency, like I said, has considered their plans to be rules, so they've never submitted them to Congress or the GAO. So you might think, oh, well, that must mean that the plans are not subject to the Congressional Review Act. And that's right, except that Congress has built its workaround for that. And that is a member of Congress can submit a request to GAO saying, hey, we'd like your opinion on whether or not this land management plan is a rule subject to the Congressional Review Act, yes or no. And what we've seen the GAO doing now in half a dozen instances last year and one more instance this year is conclude that a plan is a rule subject to the CRA. That's the background to get to your question, Kate. Like, why did they
Even though it had never been a rule before now, suddenly 30 years later, it is.
Right. And so the GAO walks through a bit of a tortured analysis to say that these rules have broad applicability, that they, I feel like it is a bit of a contorted, contrived exercise to arrive at the conclusion that this land management plan that, is really focused on how a discrete tract of land is going to be managed and what the resource decisions are for that area, in the General Accountability Office's opinion, fits into the wheelhouse of the CRA. And the reason why I'm kind of glossing over that is, frankly, it doesn't matter, because we may disagree with that. And I think there's a lot of scholarship that walks through that to say that the GAO has gone off the tracks, that land management plans have never been and are not now rules. And the reason I say it doesn't matter is the GAO's opinion can't be challenged. There's no lawsuit that somebody can bring and say, hang on, that's wrong. You're applying the wrong criteria. Instead, we're stuck with these opinions. And so that's just the reality of the situation in this Congress is we're jammed with the GAO opinion saying land management plans or rules. Congress, now you can move forward if you want.
And there's a lot there. I have like 5 different questions, so I'm going to just pick one. So going back to regular rules in the old-fashioned days when things made sense, they were sort of noticed to Congress, submitted as rules, and then there was a time clock that would start under, and within that time clock, which was like a certain number of legislative days, or it continues to exist, that rule was subject to the Congressional Review Act and could be repealed within a certain window of time after it was finalized. These resource management plans were never treated as rules, so they were never submitted, so that time clock never started. Is that correct? Is there just no clock, so these can just be subject to the CRA whenever Congress decides they don't like them?
The short answer is yes. That is really the unfortunate world we find ourselves in. We haven't seen Congress yet reach back that far. But the wheel is now in motion in this Republican Congress or in some future Congress to look back at land management plans finished years or decades ago and say, we don't like these. We're going to upset the apple cart. We're going to cause a lot of confusion in the land management world. And we're just going to wave these plans away.
All right. So the short version is the House can do whatever it wants, set its own rules, and that's basically where we're at. So I want to talk about the implications then, because these resource management plans are typically built on years of stakeholder engagement, BLM or Forest Service, in the case of forest plans, talking to folks on the ground, scientific studies. So once the CRA is then applied to overturn that years of process, what happens on the ground next? What happens to the ranchers, the communities, the tribal nations that have a stake in what's happening?
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Congress in real time is breaking the system of federal land management, just sowing incredible uncertainty and chaos into what's going to happen on the ground. We don't know the answer to those really common sense sort of questions, Aaron, that you would think Congress would ask and think about before they undertook these kind of initiatives. So we don't know. Land management plans are meant to give the public a roadmap or a blueprint for how to behave on public lands, what lands are going to be available for leasing, for ranching, for recreation. How will the federal government interface with tribal nations? What lands are going to be a focus for conservation? All of that is out the window in terms of what's going to happen next. And we're figuring it out in real time. And I think that means a lot of chaos and confusion on the ground.
Steve, sort of spinning that out even further, if these RMPs are essentially invalid because they weren't submitted to Congress properly, does that open the door for lawsuits lawsuits like over existing drilling, grazing leases, mining permits, even things that were issued because of or sort of in line with the RMP. Anyways, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the stage is being set for that. I can tell you, if I was an oil and gas company, if I was a rancher, I would be really concerned about this. We know, I mean, look, SUA, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, we don't always see eye to eye with some of the more extractive users of the public land, but we talk to these folks, we work with them when we can. And my takeaway over the years is they want certainty. They want regulatory certainty for how to behave on the public lands. If they know the rules of the road, they may try to speed sometimes, but in general, they want to know how they're supposed to behave. And what Congress is doing here entirely throws that aside. And we've seen stories in things like E&E News and other trade journals about real concerns that both members of industry and the conservation community have about what happens next. Will there be lawsuits? Will these old decisions be set aside?
You touched on this earlier. The impacts here is that clause in the CRA that prevents an agency from then writing a new rule that is substantially the same as the one that Congress overturned. But when you look at land use plans, resource management plans, they're all substantially the same from one to the next. You're trimming around the edges in some cases in terms of areas and designations, but it seems like any given land use management plan is going to be pretty much based on what came before it. So what happens to BLM now if they try to write a new management plan for these areas that got CRA'd?
I wish I had a clean answer to that. Like I said, I feel like we're discovering it in real time, what they're doing and how they're approaching it. And regardless of how they try and thread the needle, how the Trump administration tries to thread the needle for the 6 land management plans that have already been CRA'd, I feel confident there will be litigation about those decisions as well. So again, you come back to this question of, okay, regulatory certainty, that all the stakeholders who were a part of the land management planning process would know the rules of the road, and that's been thrown out.
Okay, so nobody knows what happens next. Now, to make things even more interesting, U.S. Representative Celeste Malloy of Utah is trying to use the Congressional Review Act against the Monument Management Plan for Grand Staircase-Escalante. This would be the first time the CRA has been used on a monument management plan. And she, of course, went through that same pathway of asking the GAO, is the Monument Management Plan a rule? The GAO said, yeah, for sure. Go for it. I may be summary. I haven't read that rule. I don't know what it says. You can tell us. And So what was their argument? Why does the monument management plan qualify as a rule? Is it similar to what they said about the RMPs?
It is. So GAO looked back at its 6+ decisions over the past year and said, in their opinion, and we think they're wrong, but again, not much we can do about it. This is the hand we've been dealt. I would maybe summarize their conclusion is, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And we think that a plan is a plan is a plan. The Antiquities Act was a wrinkle for them, right? I mean, national monuments are established under presidential authority through the Antiquities Act, but they were able to thread that needle for themselves. And again, I feel like there will be more scholarship to come on why monument management plans are different even than resource management plans. Neither of them should be subject to the CRA. I don't really have the luxury of thinking about that for very long, because it's, again, the hand we've been dealt for now. And worth noting, right? I mean, I just feel like people should know that Malloy requested this opinion last summer in secret. We had no clear sense of what she was doing, when she was doing it. She just sends them a letter. I suspect it was sent by the entire delegation. We don't know, because we still don't even have a copy of her letter that requested the opinion from GAO. And then 6 months later, 7 months later, really, we get the GAO's opinion that they just work on this in a black box, and the black box at the end of the day spits out the opinion that says, we, the GAO, think the Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument Management Plan is a rule and subject to the CRA, and we're off and running.
Before we move on, I want to talk about that black box a little bit. I feel like you've hinted at this, and maybe you don't know the answer, but I want to ask, what is going on at the GAO? Has it been overtaken by partisanship? Like, what's going on there?
I don't really have a lot of clarity into that. I would say, in fairness, maybe to GAO, they have been of the mind for some time. So before even this past year and the start of the Trump administration, the GAO has issued opinions over the years concluding that land management plans, things like forest plans in particular, were rules. What's different is that now we're seeing Congress act on those opinions. So the 2025 GAO opinions, the most recent opinion from GAO about the Grand Staircase, is consistent with what GAO has said over the years. We just think that they have been consistently wrong on this score, and that in fact the plans are not rules.
Right. So getting back to Grand Staircase specifically then, why? What's Representative Malloy after here by trying to get rid of this management plan?
Well, that's an interesting question, Aaron. The staircase plan, the 2025 plan, let's all be clear, was a part of a multi-year stakeholder public process. BLM met dozens of times with state of Utah officials, county, ranchers, local utilities, off-road vehicle groups, you name it, as well as hunters, anglers, guides, members of the public, to arrive at a plan. And it's a plan that reflects the fact that this is a national monument, and the protection and preservation of the resources there is supposed to be a priority. I honestly think Malloy, other members of the Utah delegation, continue to fundamentally reject the fact that these are federal public lands owned by all Americans, managed on their behalf by the federal government. She did a very brief YouTube video, which
It was weird, if I just put a label on it. That was odd.
Well, she's kind of weird.
It laid out her reasoning, or off the cuff reasoning. I think she was surprised that we so quickly saw the GAO opinion was out, and daylighted the fact that she had now set the wheel in motion to attack the Grand Staircase. And if you watch that video, it's some of the familiar arguments from Utah polit- Utah politicians about this, very few of which are grounded in fact. They want more access. There are more than 800 miles of dirt roads and trails in the monument open to vehicles. They want to be able to take photographs. I'm here to tell you, you can take photographs in the National Monument. They wanted to run cattle in the monument. Uh, Almost every square inch of the monument has a grazing allotment. And the list kind of went on. And I really think, after having done this work for a minute here in the state of Utah, it comes down to that question of Utah politicians oppose the monument on principle, and they don't want to see the federal government and the Bureau of Land Management in charge of these federal lands. They want to move those lands into private hands. They want the state of Utah to have a louder voice, and local residents a louder voice than they already have in how to manage them. And that's the driving factor here.
Okay, Steve, here's the curveball we promised you. When I was watching that short video that Malloy put out explaining why she needed to repeal this monument plan, all of those arguments that you just talked about, they were the same ones they made in the Bears Ears monument situation, and the reason that we couldn't have a Bears Ears monument because it was, going to remove access for locals and just be so bad for the economy and everything. Again, all these straw man arguments. And my question for you is, why Grand Staircase now instead of Bears Ears? It feels like Grand Staircase is the new Bears Ears. Am I overstating that?
It does feel like they are centering more on it now. Um, I don't have a great answer to that. We should note that a coalition of 6 tribal nations have formed the Grand Staircase-Escalante intertribal coalition. So we do have, so I think maybe the delegation was thinking, oh, the tribal nations have been really active with Bears Ears. We don't want to get crosswise with the Bears Ears intertribal coalition. Let's attack the Grand Staircase first. And it turns out that the premise for that is wrong, because you have these 6 nations who, for time immemorial, have been in what is now the Grand Staircase and have very deep ties and are very outspoken that they oppose any effort to attack the monument. So, I mean, that's kind of all I can look at. I mean, the staircase, of course, was first established in 96. I can tell you that we were surprised in 2017 when Trump first attacked the staircase. Sort of thought Bears Ears was on their radar screen. The staircase had already been a feature on the land. And we know local businesses, the local economy around the Grand Staircase has flourished, right? There was a Headwaters report this year, which, like every Headwaters report before it, confirmed that having the Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument makes good fiscal sense and helps local residents. And yet, facts don't matter.
All right. Without asking you to tip your hand too much, because obviously this is an evolving situation, what's your plan? What's SUA gonna do here?
We expect Representative Malloy to introduce a joint resolution of disapproval in the House of Representatives. That's the formal name of what gets introduced to try and drive a CRA vehicle forward to undo the plan. And we intend to defeat that. Plain and simple. This is the first time the Republican Congress has attacked a national monument. We need to draw a line in the sand here and say no more, and that we're not going to allow our national monuments to be undone, that these are the crown jewels of the federal public land system. Again, lands that every American has a stake in. And we are rallying members of Congress from across the nation to stand up and be counted in support of the Grand Staircase. That's the plan.
Good plan.
To fight
I
and
like
win.
it. So, what's the timing on this plan? We're recording today, Friday, February 6th at around noon. No, she hasn't introduced the CRA resolution yet, but it sounds like she could at any moment. What are you hearing about sort of the earliest that this could come up in front of Congress?
So we are very watchful, and the next vote that could come up would be as soon as next Wednesday. I think that's the 11th. So we are all systems go until we know that Congress will not vote on this on the 11th. And if we get through that, they're out of session and we'll have a minute to catch our breath. But we are sprinting because we don't want to leave any stone unturned, that if Malloy or other members of the delegation surprise us and try to jam this through next week, we want to know that we've done everything we could to stop it. I mean, as I was saying to you two before we started to record, what we have learned, sadly, is that the House of Representatives Rules Committee, who's kind of the gatekeeper to decide whether or not this will come up for a vote next Wednesday, has no rules. It's if you have the votes, you can make the rules. And that was a little bit of a surprise to me. I was maybe fooled by the name Rules Committee to think that that would mean there would be rules that would apply sort of irrespective of the circumstance. But, we are where we are. And so it's all systems go until we know we're in the clear next week.
To borrow from Bill Watterson, it's Calvin ball, but for legislation. Making it up as you go along. So then, I mean, play this out. What does it mean potentially for other national monuments? What does it mean for Forest Service rules? And then obviously we're going to get into mineral withdrawals and what's happening at boundary waters. I mean, play out the scenarios a bit for us here.
Well, I mean, it's really the sky's the limit, right? We can talk about boundary waters. That's a little bit apples and oranges to where we are, but they're both fruit, right? And so they're similar. But I do think that its national monuments will be squarely on the chopping block. When we're talking to people like Representative Simpson from Idaho, Representative Zinke from Montana, two founding members of the House Public Lands Caucus, we're talking to them about things like Missouri Breaks National Monument or Craters of the Moon National Monument. And of course, somebody like if you're from California or Nevada or New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, we all have national monuments in our state. I mean, we're so fortunate to be in the West and have these outstanding public lands that presidents for decades have decided to establish national monuments to make sure that those outstanding places are conserved and managed for the protection of those resources for now and into the future. All of that's at risk now. And it's also, I mean, frankly, it could be across the nation. We think about it as Westerners, these larger, more landscape focused monuments, but of course, national monuments, Park Service has lots of monuments that it oversees throughout the nation. And think about this administration's sort of penchant for all things DEI or civil rights. And, frankly, all of that's in the mix on the chopping block now.
Steve, I want to ask a clarifying question because we're sort of talking about these as if the monuments will go away or cease to exist if these are successful. And that's not necessarily the case. What will happen in the case of Grand Staircase specifically if that management plan is repealed? A management plan for a national monument is in a lot of ways just an invisible line on the ground, and the management plan is really what makes it a monument. So what happens if this plan is repealed?
Yeah, so that's a really great and important point, Kate, that, and I should be clear, if Congress CRAs a monument management plan, the monument proclamation stays in place and those still remain federal lands, right? But what is undone is the blueprint we talked about for how to behave, how to manage that landscape. And in a place like Grand Staircase, we don't know what would what plan would come into play. I think we know that the Trump administration would like it to be the last plan that the Trump folks had finalized in 2020, which is managing this area to a very different standard, a very different way. What I said before, I think holds here. We don't know the full rules of the road. And in a place that's so fragile, like Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument, that confusion in how to behave on the ground matters. There are these visitor centers that ring the monument in small towns like Cannonville and Escalante and Kanab, where rangers explain to members of the public who have come there from around the world how to behave and what to do and what to expect. And all of that is going to be jumbled, I think, if the plan is CRA'd.
One more clarifying question. So the monument management plan, or sorry, excuse me, the monument proclamation for Grand Staircase, in my understanding, bans new mining and new drilling leases and claims from being staked and made. Would that still be off limits, or does that also go out the window with the CRA of the plan?
The proclamation that President Biden signed in 2021 withdraws the 1.9 million acres that make up the staircase, withdraws those from the federal hard rock mining law and leasing laws. So as long as the Biden proclamation remains in place, the 1.9 million acres stays closed to those kind of activities. But let's all be clear. I mean, this is not happening in a vacuum. This being the attack on the staircase management plan through this obscure law that we've talked about, the Congressional Review Act. And we know that the state of Utah politicians are working to elevate the issue for the president. The staircase and a handful of other Western monuments are the ones that are constantly in the news about a possible Trump attack and rescission, or maybe even a complete undoing of these national monuments. So I think you just have to look at, sort of both sides of the ledger and what's in the works.
And then I feel like we'd be remiss to not mention the other frequently used method of withdrawing lands from mining and drilling, which is the administrative mineral withdrawal, which we're seeing. That's Boundary Waters and the proposed Twin Metals mine. That's Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, are administrative 20-year mineral withdrawals, and it looks like they're trying to use the CRA to target those as well. And that, I guess, in theory, under this new world of the House Rules Committee decides whatever it wants to is the rules, are those potentially now the next targets for CRA repeal?
I mean, absolutely. It is a brand new world. It's a scary world, frankly, I think, because people were surprised when the administration decided to work with Congress and use the Congressional Review Act to undo those mineral withdrawals. And there are hundreds of them, and they are potentially all on the chopping block. The saving grace, if you will, not saving grace is the right term, but maybe the governor on what they can accomplish is going to be time. And so I am nervous, though, what they will try to do in the time that they have. And like you said, Aaron, a little while ago, it is this sort of perfect constellation of having Republicans in charge of House, Senate, and the White House. After that is done, and after the Democrats take back one or both houses of Congress later this year, we will be in the clear for the CRA. The fear is what's going to happen in the rest of this calendar year. Use of the CRA for mineral withdrawal versus land management plans are, apples and oranges, which are both fruit. And that's because the GAO actually was not a part of that process for all of my complaining about the GAO. It's not clear if Representative Stauber, who is the representative kind of driving the attack on boundary waters, it's not clear if he went to the GAO. They never issued an opinion saying that the mineral withdrawal was a rule. And so now you have even another workaround where the Trump administration on its own said they thought that it was a rule. And since for the first time they were going to treat it as a rule, it only made sense for them to submit it to Congress and let Congress decide what happens next. Well, it was no surprise what Congress was going to happen. What they would do next, they would try to use the CRA. And there was a vote a few weeks ago. It was close and unfortunate that we did not win in the House, and the fight is in the Senate as soon as next week.
What a sneaky end run around the public land planning and management system that has existed for decades and prioritizes public input and collaboration and compromise. And we're throwing all of that out the window, apparently. So a Chilean mining company can make a bunch of money and poison the boundary waters. Awesome job, Congress. Good job, guys. Okay. Our guest today was Steve Bloch. Thank you so much for being with us. You are a absolute incredible resource of
knowledge.
Information. Yeah, fount of knowledge. Thank you. The words I was looking for. We really appreciate having you on. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks again, friends. I appreciate it.
Here's some good news to end this episode. The owners of Craig Unit 1, a Colorado coal-fired power plant, formally objected to the Trump administration's plans to keep that plant open in a petition to the U.S. Department of Energy. Tri-State Generation and Platte River Power Authority joined the Colorado Attorney General and a coalition of environmental groups in opposing the administration's effort to override plans to retire that power plant. Craig Unit 1 emitted more than 2 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2024. The utility and owners warned that keeping the plant open will also mean that ratepayers will unnecessarily bear the full cost of complying with Energy Secretary Chris Wright's order to keep the plant running. In other words, this plant emits a ton of pollution and costs a lot of money to run, and the people who own it don't even want to keep it running because they've already planned to retire it and replace it with cleaner sources of energy. But the Trump administration does not want that to happen.
All right. That's it for us today. You can reach us at podcast@westernpriorities.org. Make sure you are following us on social media. Our colleague Sterling continues to do great work on Instagram and TikTok without having to say the words semi-quincentennial.
Well, yet. I think it's coming. Thanks again to Steve Bloch for joining us today, and thank you for listening to The Landscape.